Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, May 6, 2025, and our friend Scott, Ritter, Professor Marandi are back with us. Welcome back.
Thanks.
And everybody who's watching us, please let us know if you can hear and watch us right now. Is that okay? Yeah.
Yes, because Scott was speaking, but apparently he wasn't being seen on YouTube.
They can hear us, yeah. Let's get started, Scott, with what's going on between Yemen and the United States and Israel. Yemeni missile has hit the Ben Gurion airport in Israel, and Israel responded together with the United States, and they have attacked Yemen and the Hodeidah. And in response to what Israel did and the United States, we know that Yemenis are talking about they're not going to back down. They're going to respond. They're going to do this until Israel backing down on their plan on Gaza. Your take on what's going on, Scott?
Well, I think we have to keep in mind that Yemen has been on the receiving end of Western military strikes for some time now, since 2014. Saudi Arabia, backed by the United States, backed by Europe, provided aircraft, munitions, intelligence, logistics in a sustained campaign that failed. Ultimately, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and other nations were compelled to seek peace because Yemen simply didn't back down. They continued to strike. They were expanding operations, and it was something that Saudi Arabia wasn't prepared to absorb, to do. So Saudi Arabia backed down. Here's the United States. We're months into an aerial campaign that's supposed to deter Yemeni behavior. It's not. The Yemeni continue to not only sustain their actions, but to escalate. This strike against Ben Gurion Airport is an escalation. They're not going to stop their naval blockade. It looks like they're imposing an aerial blockade, and there's nothing the United States and Israel can do to stop this. I want to point out that the United States had no luck so far in interdicting Yemeni ballistic missile or drone operations. It's almost a replay of the Gulf War of 1991, when the United States flew thousands of sorties into Western Iraq to try and stop the Iraqis from launching missiles against Israel unsuccessfully. Right now, the United States is unsuccessful. And I think Yemen is in a very strong position right now. The threat of an aerial blockade, backed up by the reality of a Yemeni missile that can penetrate Israel and American air defense, is something that every party has to take into account. Iran sort of hinted at something when they announced this new missile that they've developed and tested. They said that this missile incorporated technologies that were specifically brought to bear because of anti-ballistic missile efforts by Israel and the United States, demonstrated in Operations True Promise 1 and True Promise 2. That means that Iran has an active intelligence collection and feedback mechanism where they can see how the enemy responds and make adjustments to this. I would believe, and I'm not making allegations here, I'm just saying it's my belief, that there's probably some intelligence sharing between Iran and Yemen, where these lessons learned have been shared with the Yemeni and been incorporated into Yemen's own missile. I don't believe Yemen deliberately missed the Ben Gurion airport. I believe this was an offset strike. I do that based upon just simple observations, but this was an accelerated warhead that undertook numerous maneuvers to get where it's at, showing capabilities that lend themselves to precision. And so I don't believe that Yemen would undertake everything and then miss. I think that this was a deliberate miss to send a signal, because look at the result. They achieved foreign airlines saying they're not going to fly into Ben Gurion Airport. They've thrown the Israelis into a panic. And now they have the ability to escalate if needed. And if the United States and Israel continue to launch these kind of strikes, which are purely against civilian targets, there was no military component to these strikes. This was a target. These were targets of intimidation, seeking to intimidate the Yemeni population. That's a war crime by any other definition. The United States is just backing itself into a deeper problem here. And remember, part of the American goal is to deter Yemen, but the other part is to deter Iran. And if the United States is learning anything from this, because we have to remember, it was just last week that Yemen showed that it can target an American aircraft carrier. They They compelled the USS Truman to carry out an emergency maneuver to avoid being struck. It was so violent that it caused an F-A-18 aircraft to be thrown overboard. This is not a good thing when an American carrier battle group can be threatened in that way. I think a previous carrier had a Yemeni rocket land 200 meters off of its stern. This is not a good thing. If we keep playing this game, the Yemeni are going to get this target solution down, and they're going to actually hit an American carrier. And remember that intelligence back and forth? I think Iran's learning a lot from this as well. So this is not a good look for the United States. The Yemeni are determined. They're not going to back down. But we know one thing. If Israel simply ceases and desists its ongoing military operations against Gaza and respects the ceasefire, Yemen will stop its operations. It's done so in the past, and that's what it's saying today needs to happen. So the solution isn't to try and bomb Yemen into submission. That hasn't worked, and it won't work. The solution is to get Israel to comply with its obligations under a ceasefire that was negotiated back before Trump became president.
Professor.
Yes, I agree. I think it's clear that the missile did not strike the airport on purpose. It was a warning shot. The fact that it had such a high degree of maneuverability, I think, is indication of that. And Scott is right. Yemen has gone through much worse before, actually. When the Saudis attacked, and we should remember that Obama gave the Saudis the green light to attack Yemen. He's not really any different from Biden or Trump. But when he gave the green light, it was not just Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, Qatar and Turkey and the whole region, all of the countries in the region that are aligned to the United States, they supported the onslaught. And the British were sending advisors, especially for the Air Force. The Americans were in the Red Sea helping enforce a blockade. The Canadians, Europeans, everyone was a part of this genocidal campaign. And they bombed weddings. They bombed a funeral once where roughly 1,000 people were killed at that funeral. So all the atrocities that you can think of were carried out back then. But gradually, Yemen grew stronger, and ultimately, their drone and missile capabilities increased so much that the Saudis felt that they had to stop fighting, and they agreed to a ceasefire because Yemen was striking Saudi oil installations and creating huge challenges for them with regards to oil exports. So I don't see any hope for the Americans, and especially Trump, to do any better than the Saudis, who are neighbors. The Americans have to bring in aircraft carriers. It's very costly for them to carry out these airstrikes. The Israeli regime, they need American support. It's very costly for them to fly all the way from near Tel Aviv to Yemen. And it's only going to hurt them, their image further. It's going to make Yemen look heroic as it is. And they will be more popular. Ansarullah is now a name that across the region people revere. It's not going well at all for the United States. It's not going well at all for Trump. It's not going well at all for Netanyahu. And I think that there's no doubt that Scott's what he said is true. That obviously Yemen has its own military capabilities, but Iran is assisting Yemen. Iran does not hide that fact. And new technologies are being developed. We recall how almost all of Iran's missiles got through in True Promise 2. And after the Israeli strike and during the last few months, the Iranians have been spending a lot of money to upgrade their missiles and drones and air defenses for any potential major conflict with the United States. So that technological cooperation, I'm guessing, is pretty good, and I think that the Israelis, if they don't stop the genocide in Gaza, that they're going to face further difficulties and further pain from Yemen. And this also, I think, is a reminder that if there is a conflict between Iran and the Israeli regime, if they can't stop one missile from Yemen, which is being fired from 2,000 kilometers away, there's no way in the world that they're going to stop hundreds upon hundreds of missiles from Iran.
Scott, do you feel that Netanyahu is concerned about what's going on, or because we know that in the Trump administration, I don't know if you saw the article in Washington Post, says that Mike Waltz behind the scene was somehow coordinating with Netanyahu and his administration to push for this war, direct war with Iran. How do you see the Trump administration right now, and do you see the report as honest as the way that they were picturing the situation with the Trump administration?
Well, Netanyahu almost immediately responded and said this wasn't true. Now, he has a reason to say that because he doesn't want to admit that he was carrying out behind the scenes discussions with the National Security Advisor that the President of the United States wasn't aware of. And Netanyahu isn't a man known for his ability to adhere to the truth. So I would take Netanyahu's statement with a grain of salt, but I also take the statement of the White House with a grain of salt because the Trump administration is not known for its honesty. What I do believe is happening is that the Trump administration's mouth has written a check that the American body is not prepared to cash. In posturing and threatening military force, we have done a repeat of what Barack Obama did in 2014. If you remember, and Professor Marandi knows as well, in 2012, 2013, Obama was making statements about, if Iran, we will not tolerate an Iranian nuclear bomb. If Iran is going to build one, we will use military force. All options are on the table. And then in 2014, when it became clear that Iran wasn't going to be intimidated and to back down, Obama had no choice but to change the American policy from not one spinning centrifuge to, yep, we're going to allow a nuclear enrichment program. And that's how the JCPOA came into play. Today we have, Trump, making similar statements, but the situation is far dire. As Professor Marandi has indicated, Iran currently possesses a conventional ballistic missile capability that can, if not destroy Israel as a modern functioning state, do serious harm to Israel. I mean, Israel will not walk away from a major war with Iran intact. It can also do harm to American military facilities. We don't have the ability to protect our facilities from an Iranian missile attack. We would be exposed at the mercy of Iran. And we're talking about some significant facilities, for instance, Al Udeid Air Base, where we have a large number of strategically important aircraft that are deployed. We have other bases in the region that would come under attack. This would be the price we pay. And the only way, and this is where I get in trouble, but I'm just being honest, the only way the United States wins in an exchange is to use nuclear weapons. We have a doctrine that allows us to do that. We have an employment plan, and we have positioned the nuclear capable delivery systems in the theater. We have an Ohio-class submarine right now armed with Trident missiles that have W-76-2 low-yield nuclear weapons on board. They're ready to use them. We have B-61 bombs pre-deployed in Hawaii. It's just one short flight away from Diego Garcia where they'll assemble the weapons, put them on B-2s, go in. We have Tomahawk cruise missiles that have nuclear warheads on board. This is the only way we can even think of achieving a military victory with Iran, because conventionally we can't do it. We don't have the capacity to do this. First of all, we're using up all of our conventional munitions in this failed military operation against Yemen. We've used a vast number of these precision-guided munitions that we don't have an infinite stockpile of them. And if we continue this strike against Yemen, we start eating down the assets we have in the Pacific that we're supposed to use against a potential war in China, or the assets we have in Europe that we're supposed to use in case of a NATO war against Russia. We're going to chew all those down. And at the end of the day, we won't be able to implement a conventional war plan against Iran. So Trump is looking at a situation where he has boxed himself into a corner where the only military, plan that he has that could guarantee an American victory is one that nobody could even even Donald Trump in his worst day can't comprehend using. And so Trump is, even though he's put himself in this corner, I see diplomatically, he's trying to find a way out. But here he's imperiled by his own administration. Professor Marandi have talked about this before. I believe that the only way out of this is a negotiated settlement that creates a JCPOA type environment. And there appeared that there was negotiations in the way, on way. I think they got a third round. They were talking about a fourth round where they were actually talking about the technical aspects of a monitoring regime. This is like the off-ramp. And Trump blew it. Steve Witkoff went in there, listened to the Iranians, when does an American listen to the Iranians? We never listen to the Iranians. Steve Witkoff listened to the Iranians, came back and reported accurately, and there was a deal to be made. But then Netanyahu and the biggest enemy of Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, stepped in, and they've come up with the zero nuclear program. Iran will never accept this, ever. We learned this back in 2012 to 2014. Iran has linked its national pride, its national honor, its dignity, its sovereignty, everything that a nation uses to define themselves. Iran has linked to their peaceful nuclear program, their nuclear enrichment program, and they simply aren't going to give that up, especially not to Donald Trump and his bluster. So Trump's in a problem right now where there is a solution, but politically, he's blocked the solution. He's demanding complete dismantlement of Iran's program. Iran won't go for that. Therefore, that opens up war, which we can't win unless we use nuclear weapons. Trump is his own worst enemy on this one. He is literally floundering, and it's because of Marco Rubio. I mean, I have to say, Mike Waltz, I believe, was working with the Israelis behind the scenes, and he got called out, and Rubio had him fired. I think this is a power play by Rubio because now Rubio is both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, which creates a whole bunch of constitutional issues. But now he is the man running the totality of the foreign policy, national security policy for the United States. And Marco Rubio is incapable of dealing responsibly with Iran. He is the worst possible candidate as a man being the interlocutor between the United States and Iran. The same thing with Russia. He has caused whatever passed for a peace effort to collapse. Marco Rubio is a tool of the Zionists, a tool of Netanyahu, and Trump is a prisoner of these people. And we're in an impossible situation right now. I am very concerned. Iran is doing what it has to do. If I were the Iranians, I would have too launched a new missile and said, aha, whatever you think. Because remember, America, we have a Secretary of Defense who's a man-child. He's not really an adult. He's just this boy playing at warrior. And he was briefed by the Department of Defense that, we evaluated the Iranian attack too, in True Promise. Those warheads are very, very capable warheads, but, they required electronic functionality. We knew that. We knew there's a lot of things happening up there. So we've developed capabilities to jam them. And so we've deployed jammers who are going to, as these missiles come in, we're going to make their electronics not work and the missile's not going to do what it wants to do. And what Iran just did is went, yeah, we're aware of what you were doing and we got a missile now that beats your jammer. And I think the Yemeni missile that was fired in there beats the jammer too. And so Iran and Yemen have both said, you ain't got nothing on us. We're here. We're ready to do this. And again, hopefully somebody's briefing the president, Tulsi Gabbard, saying, Mr. President, we don't want to do this. There isn't a solution. There isn't a military solution. I mean, even if we're going to talk about a conventional air campaign to try and drop down Iranian capabilities, which we can't do, any targeteer knows this, we ran out of the weapons. We've used them all against Yemen. We don't have the stocks necessary. We're out of precision-guided munitions. And what is the president going to do? And again, this is why I think the solution ultimately is going to be the president's going to have to put pressure on Israel to get them to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza. That's the face-saving mechanism. It doesn't make it look like we were afraid to deal with Iran militarily, but we are. I mean, I have to be honest about this. Iran right now holds all the cards conventionally. And the only card we have is a nuclear card. And thank goodness Donald Trump doesn't yet want to play that card. it would be a disaster. It would be a humanitarian disaster, diplomatic disaster. It's stupidity personified, but that's where we're at right now. We've put ourselves in a very difficult position, but Iran ain't making it easy for us because they're pretty damn good at what they do. And, this isn't Iran blustering. Iran has real capabilities, and these capabilities can cause significant harm. And I hate to say it, but we're in a position right now where we need Iranian maturity, because you ain't getting any in out of Washington, D.C. We need the Iranians to be the mature players here. And they've shown historically that they possess that capacity. So we'll see what's going to happen. But I don't have too much faith in the Trump administration anymore. I thought for a moment that Trump would listen to Steve Witkoff, because Steve Witkoff was listening to the Iranians. I thought this was a great moment. I was really happy. But it appears that Marco Rubio's voice is louder than Steve Witkoff's voice, and the potential for a diplomatic off-ramp, if it hasn't totally collapsed, is collapsing as we speak.
Professor Marandi, it's not just about Washington Post and their report on the case of Mike Waltz. We know that the foreign minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, said that Netanyahu is doing everything to put an end to the talks between Iran and the United States. Your take, how does Iran see the case of the Trump administration?
Yes, well, Iran has a lot of information about what goes on in Washington. It has good friends across the global South. It has people inside the United States. It has experts who deal with events in the United States. So they pretty well know what they need to know. And what Scott says is absolutely correct. And in fact, I think it goes much further than Iran. We saw that Trump really became president with the promise to end the war in Ukraine. And if he had ended that war on day one, if he had said in the first week or two that I'm stopping this, it's not my war, it's Biden's war, as he keeps saying, even though he helped expand the armed forces of Ukraine, he gave them weapons, he did much more than Obama ever did. But that aside, he could have said that this is Biden's war. If I was president, it never would have happened, and I'm stopping this. And he didn't do that. And now, after more than 100 days, it's becoming increasingly difficult for him to do that, because he would have had a mandate back then. He had the momentum. He won all the swing states. He got the majority vote in the United States, unlike in the previous time when he was elected. He could have done that, but he was too cowardly, or he was too weak to make that decision. And if he had made that decision, they could have screamed bloody murder, but he would have done it, and I think most Americans would have been happy with that. He failed. He failed to do what he promised to do, and now we see that they're beginning to give the Ukrainian armed forces weapons again, and it doesn't look like there's going to be any ceasefire anytime soon. And the killing is going to continue, and the Russians are going to, as the three of us have been talking about for years now, the Russians are going to win this war. So when Trump is failing in Ukraine, which he spoke about before being elected so often, then I think that tells us a lot about Trump and his weakness. We can say the same thing about the tariff war and the way in which he keeps flip-flopping, and the way in which the people around him are flip-flopping on the tariff war, and how poorly that is going for the United States. And I would also add an agreement that he actually signed, because when it comes to the JCPOA, of course, he tore up the deal. But the Gaza ceasefire was his ceasefire. Witkoff, we were told, at least, who knows, but we were told that on a Saturday he went and read the Riot Act to Netanyahu and forced a ceasefire the day before Trump became president. But then, literally weeks later, he was the one who undermined his own ceasefire by saying the Palestinians must go, they must be ethnically cleansed, and then The Israelis reimposed Netanyahu. The Israelis, they reimposed the starvation siege, and as a result, Yemen said they'll shut down the Red Sea again to ships linked to the regime. And then he gave the green light for the genocide to restart. So on the one hand, he made a promise in Ukraine, never fulfilled. He had a deal that he carried. It was his deal. He effectively was the one who tore up his own deal. And then, of course, in the tariff war, we see that he has no solution. It seems clear to me that they did not think this through. And this is the person that Iran's looking at. They're looking at his track record. They're looking at the people around him and saying, okay, let's say somehow this guy, we have a deal. Let's say even though he keeps changing his position, he's been changing his position for the last few weeks. But let's say somehow Trump is able to close his mouth and let Witkoff do what Witkoff supposedly should be doing. And then we have a deal. Then what? What happens the next day? We wake up in the morning and then Trump posts something on Truth Social and says, I don't want this deal anymore. It's a situation which really, for which there's no real solution. There's no easy solution. I think it's almost impossible to have a solution with the United States in such turmoil.
Scott, I don't know if you saw the interview that Donald Trump had with MSNBC, in which he said, just when he was asked about the situation with Ukraine, he said that these two leaders are hating each other. And he doesn't mention anything substantial in terms of what's going on in Ukraine. He said, I got a deal with Ukraine, so European Union has its own sort of ability to take whatever they want from their frozen Russian assets. Do you see anything substantial coming to the background of his mind when it comes to Ukraine, for example, that he was bragging about before coming to power?
I'm going to answer the question, but just so you know, it's going to cost me my passport, and it may cost me my computers down the road.
Well, then don't push it.
No, I'm joking. I could care less. I mean, this is America. Either we have free speech or we don't, and I'm afraid that we don't. But I'm not going to surrender. Look, I never liked Donald Trump. When he came down the escalator in 2015, I thought he was a buffoon, a fool, and I called him that. I thought I hate. If you know anything about me, I hate John McCain. I view him as a warmongering, you know what. But he served the United States military. He was a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and he behaved with honor as a prisoner of war. And Donald Trump denigrated his service and criticized him because he was captured. This is from a man who has bone spurs that kept him out of Vietnam. So Donald Trump has no right to talk about the heroism of anybody, especially those who flew combat missions, were shot down and held prisoner and refused to be released early, even though he could have, because his father was the commander-in-chief of the Pacific Forces. He stayed as a prisoner until he was released on time with everybody else. Again, what McCain became after that, I despise. But his service, it deserves recognition as being honorable. And Donald Trump was unable to do that because he's a very petty man. A very petty man. Donald Trump went after an American judge of Hispanic origin, saying that no Hispanic should ever be judging me. This is a man who has total disregard. In that same interview, he spoke about the Constitution, saying, I don't know, Fourth Amendment? No, I may not do it. How? He's the president who took an oath to the Constitution. Now he's saying he's not going to implement it. That he doesn't know if he's going to implement it. Well, then I know that you shouldn't be president of the United States. And this is the reality. But he was running against the candidate, Kamala Harris, who I still believe to this day, had she been elected, we might have already had a nuclear war with Russia. We were headed in that direction. One thing you can say about Donald Trump is that we entered into active negotiations with the Russians. They have failed. They have collapsed, but at least we were talking. That never would have happened with Kamala Harris. She would have continued policies that the Biden administration had begun, which brought us to the brink of nuclear war in November, December of last year. So I voted for Trump to avoid a nuclear war. I voted for Trump on the belief that he would make a good faith effort to carry out these peace policies that he was talking about. He spoke, Professor Marandi, in September of last year, he was saying things about Iran that no American president have said. Meaning, I'm not for regime change. I think the Iranian regime should be allowed to be there and prosper, and I want sanctions lifted. Okay, let's see you do that. I'm all in favor of that. I'll give that a shot. He wanted peace in Ukraine and peace with Russia, better relations. So I gave him 100 days. I held my fire. I held my tongue because I understand he's a man-child. I understand that he is not an adult, that he may need some effective guidance from people to keep him pushing in the right direction. I tolerated his stupid posts, his Truth Social lunacy. I even held my tongue when he pretended that he was the ideal candidate to be Pope. I mean, humiliating over 1 billion Catholics. It shows that he has no regard for people of faith. And trust me, if he can't respect the Catholics, he isn't going to respect the Muslims either. He's not going to respect the Shia. He has no concept of religious tolerance. And yet, and so now we see what he's done here. This collapse of the he's a man who has no concept of reality. He lives in his own narcissistic fueled world. He is upset. I'll tell you my belief. He's upset because he's not in Moscow at the center of attention at the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany. He could have been, but see, it wouldn't have been on terms that made him God, because Trump is somebody who believes that he is God. He has said so. I have the power of God, he says. I have godlike capabilities. That alone should bring down a lightning bolt from heaven. But he can't be on the stage with Vladimir Putin when Vladimir Putin is in a superior position. And he certainly won't share a stage with Putin and Xi Jinping, the president of China, who's there now as the guest of honor instead of Donald Trump. Trump is a narcissist, and that narcissism is his fatal flaw because he has to emerge from everything he does as the dominant person, as the victor, and everybody else can't be equal. They must be defeated. This is why, now that I can speak freely, Professor Marandi, Iran shouldn't trust this man as far as they can throw him. And I know you know that. I know you know that. But this is a man incapable of entering the kind of deal that would be needed. Obama, at least, had enough humility to say, we have to make a compromise. So he went from no spinning centrifuges to accepting Iran's nuclear enrichment program. That's what we need to do today. We need to back away from our hardline position and make a compromise. This president can't do that because he views that as a humiliation, as a sign of weakness instead of the sign of greatness that it is. A man great enough to make compromises to bring about peace. He can't make any compromises. And so now he's made the situation much worse. The war in Ukraine will end, and it will end with a Russian victory, but it's going to end as a war, not as a special military operation. And when Russia makes the decision, I think that decision is going to be made very soon, because Russia's not going to sit around now that Trump is actively supporting the Ukrainians, actively working with Europe to expend $800 billion to rearm. They're not going to sit around and let these forces coalesce and elongate this war and bleed Russia to death, which is the objective here. The long, slow death by 1,000 cuts. Russia's in a superior position right now. And I believe that this summer, Russia is going to take some decisive action that's designed to break the back of the Ukraine. And Trump will be humiliated by this. Iran, I don't know. I mean, again, the Iranians have to make decisions. I don't think Iran wants a military war. But, the fact is, this may come down to Iran having to slap Israel around a little bit. And then absorb whatever punishment comes their way. It won't be nuclear, but it'll be conventional. I think Iran is going to have to fight a war with Israel, not to destroy Israel. I would advise the Iranians, do not unleash the totality of your capability, because then you sort of force hands. But if Iran were to go in there and show that it can do serious harm to Israel, serious harm, and still have reserve capacity to finish the job, Israel will have to take some action, and the United States will have to make a choice. Are we going to commit suicide on behalf of Israel, or are we going to have to back down? But this is a man-child that we have here. This is literally the worst president the American people have ever elected, because he's so unpresidential. I despise Joe Biden, but Joe Biden could be presidential at times when his brain functioned. Even when his presidential behavior I opposed. I was against the policies. This is a man who can't be presidential. He's incapable of being presidential, because to be presidential, you have to have humility to the Constitution, humility and fealty to the Constitution, and humility before the American people and the world. If you're going to be the world's strongest man, then you have to be a man capable of being humble with that strength. And Donald Trump isn't the strongest man. He's a weak man. He bends to all the pressure that's put on him. He doesn't know what he stands for, except if Donald Trump doesn't emerge number one, then he doesn't want to do it. Well, that's not how the world works. The world isn't built to make Donald Trump the most popular narcissist on the planet. The world is built for people to live in peace and prosperity, and Donald Trump isn't the man capable of heading us in that direction.
Professor Marandi, is the situation, as Scott mentioned, driving us toward a direct confrontation between Iran and Israel?
It's possible. There's no doubt that Netanyahu is pushing for war, as the Iranian foreign minister pointed out. And as Scott also pointed out, Trump has pushed himself into a corner. He's painted himself in a corner. So it is possible. The Iranians, of course, are not going to encourage war, but at the same time, while they negotiate, they will be preparing themselves for military conflict. Negotiating with the United States has two benefits. One is that if it fails, the world will blame the United States, and the West no longer has that monopoly on the narrative, as we're seeing. The global majority is angry about, is outraged about Gaza. It's outraged about the trade war. And the United States has been weakened by the war in Ukraine. So they no longer control the narrative like they did before. Even inside the United States itself, we see that the mood is shifting quite dramatically. It's been only 19 months, even though it's been like forever. We're seeing the slaughter take place day and night. But it's only been 19 months, and the sea change inside the United States itself with regards to Israel, the Israeli regime, is huge, and it will probably continue. At the rest of the world, it's the hostility towards the regime is enormous. I just returned from China. I was in Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen, and everywhere I went, people were angry and hostile towards the regime. So the negotiations that take place, the very fact that Iran is carrying out these indirect negotiations, is that they want the global South, the global majority public opinion, to see the problem as being an American problem. But then on the other hand, if the United States is open to an agreement, a reasonable agreement that where the Americans respect Iran's sovereignty, then that's fine too. But Iran is preparing itself. The last few months, Iran has gained a lot of intelligence about the U.S. and Israeli defense capabilities through True Promise 1 and 2, and I'm sure through Yemen and what's going on in Yemen. And at the same time, the Israeli regime, its airstrikes and U.S. support for those airstrikes has given Iran a lot of intelligence. It's the first time that Iran has been dealing with airstrikes since Saddam Hussein's the Western-backed war against Iran by Saddam Hussein. So the Iranians are using these months to prepare themselves. But what I would like to also point out is that it's really quite fascinating that Trump wanted to bring about an end to the war in Ukraine to focus on China and probably on West Asia. But what he's actually done is the exact opposite. He's reinforcing the relationship between Moscow and Beijing and Moscow and Tehran. And he is also dividing U.S. power and the power of the West, whatever that means nowadays, and taking into account the divide between Europe and the United States. So what is happening is that he cannot focus on Iran. He cannot divide Iran and separate Iran and Russia. I don't think he could have anyway, but he could have tried to create some distance. And of course, the same being with China. And then with the trade war, and this I think is the most fascinating thing. After the proxy war in Ukraine, until the proxy war in Ukraine, it was, to be very blunt, Iran was more proactive in its relationship with Russia. Russia was always cautious because of the sanctions. because of the threats made by the United States. Even the UN Security Council resolutions that were imposed on Iran, Russia and China didn't want any of those UN resolutions. But they were weaker back then. The United States was the stronger power. All they could do was they could water them down. And they did. And all those UN sanctions, the Russians and the Chinese worked hard to water them down as far as they could within that framework where the Americans were still the hyperpower. So after the war in Ukraine, it really reversed. The Russians were seeking better relations with Iran. They were pushing for expanding the relationship, and the Iranians worked with the Russians, and the relationship has changed dramatically at all levels: economic, social, political, and so on. China was cautious because of the sanctions. But in general, China, it's like, as I don't recall who told me this, but some Chinese professor once said this to me maybe a decade ago, maybe more. I don't recall who it was. But he said China is like a super tanker. When it wants to turn around, it goes very slow. What Trump did with the tariff war was that he turned this super tanker into a speedboat. And China just shifted in a way in which we've never seen before, at least in this era. And now the Chinese-Russian relationship is much stronger than before. The Chinese-Iranian relationship is much stronger than before. So Trump, he's been acting as a catalyst to bring all this, and then it's not just Iran, Russia, and China, because it's the whole, the global South. It's even Europeans and the Japanese, and everyone is angry, the Canadians. So he has isolated the United States. He's strengthened the bonds between those countries that the United States like to see as its enemies. Iran doesn't want the United States as an enemy. The Russians don't want the United States as an enemy. The Chinese don't want the United States as an enemy, but the Americans have chosen to make them their enemies. So he's acted as a catalyst to bring, and of course, in the case of Ukraine, it was Biden too, but Trump, by failing to bring about any real change in U.S. policy, ultimately, as we're now seeing, is continuing to be that catalyst. So he's acting as a catalyst to isolate the United States, just focusing on Iran, to have Iran have allies, powerful allies, regional allies across the global South, and where the bond between key countries for Iran, China, and Russia, has become much stronger than before, and it is Beijing and Moscow that is more proactive than they ever have been in the past in expanding that sort of relationship. How much of a failure can you be? I mean, how can you do things worse for the United States than what Trump is doing? It would be pretty hard indeed.
Scott, the picture that Professor Marandi is giving us shows how the world has changed. And you mentioned, you compared the Obama administration to Donald Trump. And do you think that is there any sort of understanding in the current administration, in the Trump administration, to compare the position that they're in to the position that Obama had in those days, or maybe Joe Biden?
This would require a level of introspection that can only come with humility and intelligence. And this administration isn't known for either. I mean, probably the best person best positioned is Tulsi Gabbard, but she's not a policymaker. She provides intelligence. And you saw with her, when she did her threat assessment, global threat assessment, the assessment she put out about Iran was a very specific assessment designed to create the potential for negotiation. I mean, she did her job, and she has been advocating against, military action against Iran, but, she's been pushed to the side by both the National Security Advisor, who's now fired, and now Secretary Rubio, who's also the National Security Advisor. So no, I don't think this administration possesses that capacity. You know, Professor Marandi is 100% correct. I mean, if in a perfect world, Donald Trump would be arrested for treason, because what he's done to harm the United States of America it borders on treason. These are actions that can't be said just bad policy. These are actions which are deliberate in nature and achieve a result which is predictable. You know, it's not that you don't know what's going to happen when you do these things. The mere fact that we turned the supertanker into a speedboat alone is a huge defeat for the United States, because we did have some leverage on China. You know, the thing is, what the United States possessed before Trump became president, yes, we are a superpower that's reached our maximum growth. But that doesn't mean it's over. It's just like when you study the history of the Byzantine Empire, maximum growth, but then there's a period of time of sustainment, and then the empire starts to get whittled away, but it takes a long time to bring the empire down. What Trump has done is we're at our maximum growth. What we should have been doing is leveraging the influence that we have, the ability to play one side off against another cleverly, to change narratives where needed. For instance, the Ukraine conflict, become a messenger of peace. Now we have more influence with Russia, which means that we can subtly say to Russia, you might want to not do that deal with Iran. And Russia might have listened, because they're looking at hundreds of billions of dollars of trade with America. But, you know, things, I can't guarantee outcomes. I can't speak on behalf of the Russians. I'm just saying that from an American point of view, there were leverage that we could play. If I were a policy guy, I would say we need to make sure we have as much input into Iran as possible. Not control, but we need to be talking with Iran. We need to make sure that if we make a phone call, Iran picks up on the other end. That alone is an ability to influence. The fact that Iran would be willing to pick up a phone call and listen it's a good thing. It's a great thing. We could have done all this and been clever. Instead, Donald Trump has just come in and he shot himself in both feet. Then he shot himself in this shoulder and this shoulder. And now he's getting ready to pull the trigger on his head. He has accelerated the demise of the United States. We're not in a position of sustaining maximum growth. He is literally collapsing the empire from below. He's taking the foundation out. Nobody trusts us anymore. Nobody takes us seriously anymore. All we are is a big goofy person with a big, you know, with a bunch of weaponry, and we're running out of those weaponry. Why do you think we have $1 trillion defense budget, which, by the way, goes against what Donald Trump promised the American people? We have $1 trillion defense budget because we don't have any weapons left. We have to buy them all. We gave them all to Ukraine. We've thrown them all at Yemen. We got nothing left to fight with. So we're going to have to spend money that we don't have on an economy that's being destroyed because of stupid tariff policies. This guy is literally doing everything he can to facilitate the collapse of the United States. And it's not a good time to be an American. I'll tell you that. This is a man who said he wanted to make America great again. He's made America an embarrassment. He's made America a failure. Anything but great. This is other than the fact that we avoided short-term a nuclear conflict with Russia, this president has achieved nothing positive at all.
Professor Marandi, you mentioned the case of China and Russia, but when it comes to Iran, why does the United States need Iran to be an enemy of the U.S.? Is that all about Israel?
Well, obviously the United States likes to use the embassy takeover, and they use that as the beginning of history, effectively, sort of like October the 7th, where they use it as the starting point in everything, whereas it began with the Nakba even before then, and decades of oppression against the Palestinians and genocidal attacks and ethnic cleansing has been going on. But they choose that in order to hide the reality. The embassy takeover was the result of the coup, the United States imposing its dictator on the Iranian people, creating the Savak, the notorious secret police, and then helping the Shah gun down, supporting the Shah when he gunned down people on the streets during the revolution, many thousands of people. So, so when the Americans gave refuge to the Shah, students took over the embassy. They were afraid of a new coup, and also they wanted the Shah back for being a mass murderer. And so that was, of course, what how the Americans like to define it. But the reality is that U.S. hostility towards Iran is because of Israel. And if it wasn't for Israel, the situation would not be like this. Not just for Iran, this region wouldn't be in this crisis. In fact, I always say that the existence of the Israeli regime is detrimental to U.S. interests. It's a burden for the Americans. This region would have been friendly to the United States and to the Europeans, both North Africa and West Asia and beyond. And they would have benefited from trade and business. You wouldn't have all these refugees to cause all these social tensions in Europe if there was no Israel. I think there's no doubt about that. One thing I wanted to add, because both you and Scott did mention Obama. I don't like him, obviously. Obama destroyed Libya. His Secretary of State famously went and said, we saw, he died. And we know how the leader of Libya died. They sodomized him with a knife, these Takfiri militants that the Americans and oil and gas-rich countries in the Persian Gulf have been funding for decades. In the past, mostly the Saudis, more recently the Qataris and Turkey have been the center of support for these groups. He helped with the genocidal attacks in Yemen, which killed probably hundreds of thousands of people. And he initiated the dirty war in Syria, where Erdogan, Abdullah of Jordan, Qatar, and others betrayed the Syrian people and murdered hundreds of thousands of people and destroyed the country. And it is what it is today, thanks to these regimes that followed Obama. Of course, Erdogan had his own personal ambitions, but he destroyed Syria in the meanwhile, being an agent of the United States. So Obama did all that. But Obama had a soft power, and he also did the drone attacks. He was the guy who started bombing people and killing people with drones, and we know that overwhelmingly they were innocent, and he knew that. But Obama had tremendous soft power capabilities, and his father was African. He was of mixed race. He was an excellent speaker. He spoke of change. He beat McCain, and of course, I think the financial crisis in the United States hit at a very at a moment which benefited him, and that helped him to become president. But in any case, that soft power capability that he had coming after Bush made him a problem, because people across the world, and including in Iran, they wanted to believe that this guy was really different. And so he was able to use those capabilities, despite all the sinister things that he did, to create division inside Iran, to create division across the region, across the world. Trump is the exact opposite of that. He unifies Iranians. If you go and sit in a taxi and talk about like a nuclear negotiations, the taxi driver will say, "This guy is crazy." When I was in China, as I said just last week, one of the extraordinary things is that in this trade war, something that people don't talk about that often, is that in China, not only do they have an advantage because they produce goods and the Americans don't, and all that, their population, but also the very fact that Trump initiated this unites the people of China, because they're not going to blame their government first when there's hardship. I'm sure they will. Whenever there's hardship, people blame the government for good or for, rightly or wrongly. But a lot of the blame will be put on the Americans. The American society blaming Trump because he initiated this war. So Trump has this extraordinary ability to do exactly the opposite as what Obama was able to do. Obama was able to use his extraordinary soft power capabilities, probably his most effective weapon, to divide and as a result to strengthen the U.S. position. Trump does the exact opposite. He unites his opponents. He unites those he antagonizes, both inside the United States and abroad. And that, I think, is another element that is weakening the United States. So today, ordinary Iranians are very united. Many people may not like the government. Many people may have, if you could sit in a taxi, any taxi in Iran, if you go around Tehran in the metro, on a bus or elsewhere, that people have, for every 100 people, you have 100 different visions of the world in Iran. It's actually more the debate that goes on in Iran, both online and offline, is far, and I know people in the West wouldn't want to believe this, but it is far more there's much greater debate in Iran than you have in the West, at least in the public sphere and in, let's say, the mainstream media. From what I see, think tanks in Iran, intellectuals in Iran, the debates they have are far more divisive, or they're far more divided in Iran on all sorts of issues than they are in the West. There's a lot of debate going on. However, there is a unity now in Iran that this guy is crazy. This guy, you can't deal with him. Now, it may be not fully accurate. It may be exaggerated. It may be right. It may be wrong. That's not the point here. It's, in my opinion, is to a large degree correct. But that's not the point. The point is that in this way, he's a gift to the Iranian government. He's a gift to the Chinese government. And he's a gift to many governments who want to resist the United States under these circumstances.
Yeah, Scott, if you want to add something to what Professor Marandi said, you feel free to do that. But the question is the same question. Why does the United States need Iran to be the enemy?
Well, first of all, I just want to back up based on my own personal experience. I had the honor and privilege of traveling to Iran back in 2006, I believe, right after Ahmadinejad was president. And I thought I was going to see a police state. I thought I was going to see people intimidated, especially with Ahmadinejad's reputation. And I can vouch that when I entered into a restaurant, unfortunately for me, I was a known fact. I couldn't be covert in Iran. And when I entered a restaurant, people were like, Scott Ritter, why are you here? Next thing you know, I'm surrounded by people who are, we have a table full of people. And it was entertaining because there was more different opinions on every topic. Things that you thought would have been, for sure, I would say, oh, an Iranian will take this position. Oh no, man, what is an Iranian apparently? Because there were, you couldn't say, well, that's an Iranian position. That's not. As Professor Marandi said, there was 100 different positions, and it was amazing to watch. And it was all sophisticated conversation too. It wasn't the kind of inanity you get in the United States, often very simplistic, sometimes racist, xenophobic. These were sophisticated arguments coming from a place of intelligence. They just had different opinions, and it was a lot of fun to watch. And I learned a lot about Iran during that trip. That it was a far more open society than, as I told people, I've been to Middle East dictatorships, and Iran is not a Middle East dictatorship. It's the furthest thing from it, at least the Iran that I experienced. And I would love someday to go back and update my database so that I'm not talking about something that's 19 years old, something more fresh. But I'll take Professor.
You have a passport.
I have to get a passport first. Yes.
If you get your passport, hopefully we'll have you here.
Yeah, if not, I'll just have to live off of old memories. The United States, unfortunately, look, let's just deal with the reality. We have to go back and talk about the military-industrial complex. We have to talk about the warning that we have to talk about the United States after World War II. We were a nation that was suffering through a Great Depression. We get this war. We mobilize our national industry for military purposes, and our economy is recovering. A lot of aspects of this war were designed to achieve economic dominance. Bretton Woods, what we did with the British, a lot of people don't realize that we basically sucked the British dry when it came to terms of their gold reserves and all that. We did the same to the French. We wanted to bring down colonial competition. We wanted America to reign supreme around the world. In order to sustain this, while we might have promoted peace and prosperity through the United Nations, we didn't desire peace and prosperity. We needed conflict. We needed an enemy. Our enemy was the Soviet Union, the Chinese. We created the Cold War, and our economy developed in that way. You look at the 1950s, and the whole purpose of the Red Scare was to justify building bombers and building missiles and continuing to build a strong U.S. military. Dwight Eisenhower warned us about this, about the danger of becoming addicted to a military economy, but we sustained that addiction, and that's the addiction that we have today. I mean, look, $1 trillion. How do we justify $1 trillion defense budget? We don't justify it by making peace. This is why Donald Trump is such a huge disappointment, because we could have brought down defense spending by making real peace with Ukraine and Iran, and that's what I believed in. I believed I was going to give him a chance to do that, but we can't. We're incapable, because as a nation, we can only exist. Americans don't like to admit this, but this is the God's honest truth. We are wealthy because we steal from the world. We steal from the world because of unequal arrangements. We obtain global resources at costs that are far below what normally would be if we engaged in normal economic interaction. And our economy needs these to keep prices low so the American people can continue to be lured up to the dream of the American dream. Our economic planners here in America, their job is to keep every American citizen on the cusp of bankruptcy, meaning that we are now prisoners. We have to buy into this consumer mentality where we have to consume to our economic detriment, but we keep believing that there's the potential of something good happening, a breakthrough moment. And suddenly you're 70 years old and you realize that your life has been wasted pursuing a false dream. That's America in a heartbeat. That's the truth. And in order to keep this going, we have to have wars. It's almost Orwellian, where we have to have enemies. There was a book written in the 1970s by Stockwell, I think, a former CIA guy, In Search of Enemies. We're a nation in search of enemies. We need enemies. We must have enemies. If we don't have enemies, we can't function. We don't know how to function without enemies. So if there isn't a real enemy out there, we're going to make one. Iran is not a real enemy of the United States. I know that the Iranians have a huge grudge against us. The coup that Professor Marandi speaks about is the coup against Mossadegh in 1953, where we overthrew a democratically elected leader of Iran. If we believed in democracy, we should have believed in Mossadegh, but Mossadegh believed in Iranian oil being used to the benefit of the Iranians, not for the benefit of the British. And the British said, well, we can't have him taking our oil. And so America came in and we helped overthrow. We put in the Shah and we helped impose decades-long autocratic rule that was very cruel. I mean, America likes to show photographs of Tehran in the 1970s with the women in their miniskirts and Frank Sinatra singing at a concert. We're saying, isn't that wonderful? Well, it might be wonderful for us, but what about the Iranians? Do we respect the fact that many Iranians are conservative in nature, and maybe the miniskirt isn't the thing that resonates with most? I don't think Iran went to war because of the miniskirt. They went the revolution wasn't because of the miniskirt. The revolution was because of the Shah Savak and the oppression of the people. And what happens is you get a cause and effect relationship. I call it Newton's third law of physics applied to geopolitics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And when you wrap miniskirts into an autocracy dictatorship that's oppressing people, when the pushback comes back, the miniskirts go. And so does Frank Sinatra, and does so all the things of the Western trappings. But Iran is not a natural enemy of the West. If anything, Iran is a natural ally of the West. When you look at Iranian history and even the inclination of Iran, when I was doing research on Iran's nuclear program back in like 2004, I was talking to some people about Iran's academic infrastructure. And they said, look, Iran has the highest percentage of peer-reviewed PhD candidates in the world. And the majority of their peer review takes place in the West, meaning that the intellectual development of Iran is developing on par with and aligned with the intellectual development in the West. Like minds thinking alike. It's not foreign. Iran is not foreign to the West, and the West is not foreign to Iran. And if it weren't for an artificiality like the United States coming in and compelling, or Israel stirring the pot up, because the United States is acting on behalf of Israel. There's just no doubt about that. We pick on Iran because Iran has chosen through their constitution, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Marandi, but Professor Marandi, but the Iranian constitution is the only constitution in the region that, mentions Palestine and the duty to promote Palestine. Israel takes umbrage at that, so Iran becomes a natural enemy of Israel. But if it weren't for Israel, there is no reason for the United States to be opposed to Iran. In fact, it would be every reason for the United States to have open and economic relations with Iran. That Americans should be able to travel Iran without fear of oppression. I mean, don't do stupid things. Just like don't come to America and do stupid things. Don't go to Iran and do stupid things. But if you go to Iran and you treat the Iranians with respect, you show appreciation for their culture, for their history, and you want to learn, Iran is an open book. I learned that. They're willing to show you their country. They're proud of their country. They love their country. We should be friends with the Iranian people. They're a great people. They have a deep and wonderful culture. They have a history that is admirable. But we are their enemy because we need enemies. And in this case, in the Middle East, Israel defines who our enemies will be. And that's what's going on. Just like we need Russia as the enemy. Russia is the last nation in the world we should be enemies with. Literally, the Russian people are more like what America wants to be than America is. And, we should try to be like that. We're in search of enemies. And we have surrounded ourselves with friends, therefore, who aren't really our friends. And that's the thing. I'm not going to speak ill of Saudi Arabia at all. What I'm going to say, though, is that Saudi Arabia, this is compelled friendship. I would bet you a dime to a dollar behind closed doors where nobody's listening. Saudi Arabia doesn't speak too kindly of the United States because there's not much to speak kindly of. We have forced them into a situation that China has helped get them out of, where they were facing perpetual conflict with Iran. I would say in Europe right now, there are many that go to Canada. The Canadians, my God, our neighbors, the Canadians who hate nobody. The Canadians hate nobody. They're learning to hate us. Europe is learning to hate us. Why? Because we should be hated the way we behave. We are in search of enemies. Iran shouldn't be our enemy. There's no reason for Iran to be our enemy. There's every reason for us to live in peace and prosperity with Iran. But we need an enemy because Israel demands we have an enemy, because Israel can only exist if it's surrounded by enemies, because otherwise Israel is an abomination. It's an unnatural state whose existence is predicated on them being superior, dominating everybody else. How can you do that and live in peace and prosperity? Israel needs all of its neighbors to be its enemies to justify Israel's continued existence. And Israel has a death grip on America right now, and America will do what Israel tells it to do. And right now, Israel's saying Iran must be your enemy.
One sentence that I'd like to point out or add is that Mossadegh, the prime minister who was overthrown, Dr. Mossadegh, possibly the greatest mistake that he made was that he trusted the Americans. And that's what brought him down.
Yep. And I just want to say, you're right. And that's a source of humiliation for every American. Because we live in a country that pretends to believe in the rule of law. We tend to believe that the Constitution is this document of principles. And the key aspect to the rule of law and principles is integrity and honor. There was a time in America, I grew up in this time. A lot of people laugh at me when I have a conversation with somebody and I reach out my hand to shake. And I say, that's my contract. When I shake your hand, that's my contract. My word is my bond. And there was a time in America where that actually meant something. When you shook a hand, everybody saw you shake hands. And if you lost all you were evicted from society because you were no longer a man of character, no longer a man that could be trusted. America built its reputation on trust. You may not have liked what we were doing, but when we shook your hand, we kept that deal. We kept that deal. Not today. American handshake is useless. America's word's useless. We lie. We don't know how to tell the truth. We don't know how to be honest. And this is a source of humiliation for me as an American, because I'd like to believe that we need to get back to that point where we're on. Trump can't even be honest with himself about what he wants with the United States. He lies to himself on a daily basis, and he lies to his advisors, and he lies to the American people. And we've normalized lying. We've turned it into a joke almost. America's become a meme of itself, where lying is laughed about. You don't expect American honesty. It's just assumed we're telling lies. That's not how this country works. This country should be composed of honest men who look you in the eye and shake your hand, and their word is their bond, that is their contract, and they will never deviate from that, because to do so means that they have lost their status as a man of substance. We're not a nation of substance anymore. I apologize for Professor Marandi and to everybody else for the way America behaves, because we need to be better. The America that I want, that I believe in, this is why I'm a citizen. It's an America that you can look us in the eye, shake our hand, and our word is our bond. And you don't have to worry about us stabbing you in the back. We'll be brutally honest with you up front. And once we commit to something, we will carry that commitment out faithfully. But we're not that country anymore. We betray everybody. There's not a nation out there right now that we haven't betrayed, including Israel.
Professor Marandi, the case of Europe, we know that what role Europe wants to play with the case of Ukraine. But when it comes to Iran, where do they stand? And how does Iran perceive the position of Europe for the case of Iran?
I don't think Iran takes Europe that seriously. The Europeans have shown themselves to be incapable of playing a constructive role with regards to the nuclear program. When Trump tore up the nuclear deal, the Europeans promised to find a solution, and all they did was they were dishonest with the Iranians. They were buying for time. They just wanted to prevent Iran from restarting its nuclear program, but also to allow the U.S. sanctions to remain in place. Whether it was out of weakness or out of dishonesty or both, probably both, they had no positive impact with regards to the nuclear issue. Also, right now, when we look at Gaza, the Europeans play the same role as the United States. Some European countries have been giving enormous aid to the Israeli regime, the Germans, the British, but also we see that friends of ours, they are being arrested, they're being harassed simply for speaking out against genocide, simply for pointing out facts. People are being arrested for carrying Palestinian flags and rallies, not even Muslims. Jews are being harassed. People are being expelled from university. People who we know. I don't want to name any of them because I'll forget other names, which would not be fair. But that is Europe today, and Europe, of course, is also a diminishing entity. It's a diminishing power. We see the divisions within Europe on the one hand. We see the decline in European strength and power economically, the sanctions imposed on Russia, the Russians. So Europe is weaker. Europe supporting genocide. Europe is becoming authoritarian, and we see what they're doing with elections. I'm no fan of some of these political parties, but they lecture to us, but they do exactly what they criticize others for. And so, and as I said, they've never played any positive role with regards to the nuclear negotiations, despite promising otherwise. So I don't see them as carrying much weight. The Iranians will negotiate with them. Dr. Araghchi said, I think, that his deputy will, I'm not sure if he said it, but the Iranians stated that the Iranian deputy foreign minister will meet deputy foreign ministers of the E3 after negotiations with the United States, which did not happen last week. I assume that if they do happen this week, these talks will take place. But the very fact that they'll be carried out by deputy foreign ministers shows that the Iranians don't take them nearly as seriously as the negotiations being carried out by the minister. The foreign minister, after negotiating with Witkoff, he goes to China, he goes to Russia, he goes to friendly countries to keep them informed. And then they say, okay, we'll send the deputy foreign minister to speak to the Europeans. I think that's basically sending a strong message, and it's pointing out what I've been explaining.
Just to throw in, Professor Marandi, you might know who said this, but there was a saying back in the early days of the nuclear issue. Why drive a Pajak when you could drive a Mercedes? Meaning, why negotiate with Europe when you can negotiate with the United States? And so I think Iran's always had a not a very good attitude towards the Europeans when it comes to being good, faithful negotiation partners. Did I get that quote right?
It's something like that. Yes, that has always been stated, and it's always been clear. The Europeans have always been sending messages back and forth, and they really haven't had positive input. Whenever the Americans want to hurt Iran, the Europeans stand shoulder to shoulder. But whenever the Americans are acting unreasonable based on their own commitments, the Europeans still stand shoulder to shoulder with the Americans, just like what they're doing with Gaza, what they're doing elsewhere. Yeah. So the problem that Iran has is that, we've been discussing, Scott has pointed out how the United States behaves. The problem is that we don't have good partners in the West, whether it's the United States or the Europeans. The United States has one set of problems, the Europeans have another set of problems. And the reality is that the future of Iran as a result of these policies is the global South, it's the global majority, it's Asia. And the United States, the only good thing that the United States has done, and the West in general have done, is that they've pushed us towards Asia, because we would have probably lingered and continued to try to do trade with these economies that are emptying out, and we would have, continued to work with them and ignore what's going on in Asia. But thanks to these, in these sanctions, and not thanks to the sanctions, but because of these sanctions, the Iranians have been exploring new opportunities. The North-South transport corridor is something, now that you look at it, it should have been done 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. But because we've always been focused on the West, we ignored our own interests. We've been ignoring, the capabilities and the potential that our region has. So we didn't think too much about the North-South transport corridor. We didn't think about the Belt and Road or the Silk Road or the corridors going through Central Asia or through even Afghanistan. But now because of these sanctions, we have to think about all these things, and we're discovering that we've been making huge mistakes. Not that we should not be doing business with the West. If the West behaves reasonably, we would do business with them too. But we've been ignoring what is even more beneficial to us, because we've been lingering in the past, sort of, in this Eurocentric imaginary world. So again, here, despite the hardship that sanctions bring, it has forced us to look to the future and to explore these potentials. And I think we're going to see the results in the coming years.
Yeah. Scott, do you think that Russia feels the same way?
I'm always loath to be in a position where I'm speaking on behalf of any government.
So just
I think
accepting their
Russia.
behavior.
I think Russia's a very realistic, pragmatic country, governed by people who are grounded in reality. Russia knows what happened and knows what has happened over the past. Russia knows the policies of the United States towards the Soviet Union and then towards Russia. Russia knows what happened in the 1990s. Russia knows what the United States was doing in Ukraine. Russia knows what America's strategic policy objectives are. And Russia knows that America is no friend of Russia. You have a president come along who claims that he wants to take a different trajectory, that maybe we could be friends. Maybe we don't have to have this strategic animosity. And Russia pragmatically allows that door to be opened, but not at the expense of everything else. Russia has built a position today post Ukraine conflict where its economy is free from the malign influence of the West's economy, where politically it's not dependent upon sound diplomatic relations with Europe or the United States. It has this strengthened bond with Iran, with China, and others. And so, Russia, I think, would like better relations with the United States. It's smart to have better relations. But even if Russia gets better relations, Russia's not going to undo what it's done. To give you an example, during the early weeks of Trump's outreach to Russia, there was a lot of optimism in Europe that the Russian market could be opening back up. I don't think that's the case anymore because Trump's an idiot. Sorry, I had to inject my personal opinion there. His policy on sanctioning and all that, it's just detrimental. It's stupid. It's not going to work. But Russia knows this. But the Russian government already said, look, those companies that worked in Russia, who were succeeding in Russia, we didn't kick you out. You left. And when you left, that means that you were actively taking a side in this conflict. You voted to be the side with Europe and the United States. And now you want to come back. But in your absence, we developed our own economy. We have Russian companies that have filled the void and are doing a really good job. We have Russians making a living, earning a living, making Russian products that the Russian people can be proud of. And you want to come in and supplant these people. That's not going to happen. There's no room for you. You are not welcome here in Russia. And I think that's the Russian approach right now. Where things can be beneficial, they can be beneficial. But Russia is not going to reverse course or alter trajectory of a path that's taken it. Russia's stronger today than it's ever been, militarily, socially, politically, economically, diplomatically. Russia is the envy of much of the world for what they've accomplished here. They're not going to throw this away just to be friends with a United States that's incapable of being a true friend. So I think Russia understands that it can survive without America. It can thrive without America. And that a relationship with America, is one that should be treated very carefully. And Russia has no need for Europe right now. Russia still there's potential of good things to happen with America. With Europe, there's no potential whatever. Russia is divorced from Europe, doesn't need Europe, doesn't want Europe, doesn't like Europe. And doesn't lose anything by not having relations with Europe. Europe has built its own house, and now it has to live in it. And it's a house that's going to be free of Russia. Europe is going to sink, crack, collapse. Russia is going to grow and thrive.
Professor Marandi, Vladimir Putin had an interview recently in which he was asked, did you know about, the reporter asked him, the reporter is a Russian reporter, asked him, did you know that our economy is so strong that we can confront the United States with the case of Ukraine? He said, I was not quite sure 100% that we can do that. But finally, they have reached a point that they know how powerful their economy is. I think that would happen to Iran. Do you see that coming to Iran?
Well, actually, Iran contributed a lot to Russia being able to stand up to the sanctions because Iran had been experiencing maximum pressure sanctions for many years. And as soon as the sanctions began on Russia, we literally saw hundreds of delegations come to Iran from different ministries, from different parts of the state, the private sector, trying to figure out how to sell oil, how to sell products, how to import, how to get spare parts, and how to deal with planes that need spare parts. And so there was a lot of cooperation. And what Iran learned the hard way over many years, the Russians were able to learn very swiftly and to overcome many of those problems. Iran, too, has obviously gained a lot from the experiences of the past. And by helping the Russians, Iran gained further Russian friendship. Today, as I was explaining earlier, and as Scott also pointed out, because of the changing relationships that we're seeing in the world between Iran and Russia, between Iran and China, between countries across the global south, we just recently saw, as you both know, and as I'm sure your audience knows, the son of the king of Saudi Arabia, the minister of defense, come to Tehran, and the brother of the crown prince, bringing a message from the king. And the language used during that trip by the defense minister was quite extraordinary. And Ayatollah Khamenei, he met him, he received him, which I think was very significant. That usually does not happen. He said something that I thought, and some of my friends also think, was very significant. He said that we'd be happy to give our pass on our scientific knowledge to Saudi Arabia, which I think it was clear that he was alluding to Iran's nuclear program and enrichment. So I'm not saying that the relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia are going to be ideal. Iran, of course, is really the only country that's supporting the Palestinian people. Of course, you can add Yemen. It's a government, Ansarullah and their allies. They've been controlling the capital. They are the legitimate government in Yemen. It's only Iran and a couple of other countries that accept their government as the legitimate government, but they are the legitimate government. So Iran, alongside Yemen, they're the only two governments in the world that are truly supporting the Palestinian cause, and they've been doing a great deal. And Iran has been making huge sacrifices for well over 4 decades, whereas countries that pretend to be friends of Palestine, like Qatar and Turkey, have been betraying them. So they've been, whether it's in Syria or whether it's in Yemen, the Qatar and the Emirates and Bahrain have been helping the Americans bomb Yemen, and indirectly they're now helping the Israelis bomb Yemen by cooperating with the United States. But in any case, the relationship with Saudi Arabia, though we have big differences over the region and Palestine and the Israeli regime and what the United States is doing, it has evolved. This is a changing relationship. And as Scott pointed out, this is partially thanks to the Chinese. Of course, I think we all know that, or many of us know, that this actually, General Soleimani was trying to create rapprochement with Saudi Arabia. The Iraqi prime minister at that time, when General Soleimani was murdered by Trump, Dr. Adel Abdul Mahdi, told me personally that he was supposed to see General Soleimani for breakfast at 8 or 8:30, I don't remember now. And General Soleimani had entered Baghdad International Airport it was like 1 a.m. when he was martyred, but he was going to see the prime minister hours later to discuss a letter from Saudi Arabia about rapprochement. And that, of course, I think that probably had something to do with the assassination, among other things. But the point is that Iran has been working towards rapprochement thanks to the role that the Chinese played, which is the exact opposite of the United States, which tries to divide and rule. The relationship has improved. So today we see a very different world. We see a very different region. We see a world we were discussing earlier, the United States is isolated. Even allies of the United States in this region don't want war. A decade ago, many of these people wanted war. We saw from WikiLeaks documents that many of these leaders in the Persian Gulf region were egging on war against Iran. Now these countries are sending messages to Iran saying, look, we don't want to have anything to do with this. The Saudi defense minister comes. They're pushing the Americans not to start a war. The world has changed. And unfortunately, the United States, the elites in the United States don't recognize that change is taking place. They continue to pursue the same old policies as before, whereas even young Americans see the reality. As I was saying earlier, young Jews, young Christians, young Muslims, people from all walks of life in the United States, despite the censorship, despite big tech's role in shutting down debate, they see a reality that the leadership in Washington is blind to. And that, I think, is going to, as Scott was saying earlier, is going to quicken the decline and collapse of the United States. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but I think that the empire is collapsing in front of our eyes. And I also think that the Israeli regime is collapsing, but in a different way. I think it will collapse. It will cease to exist in the not so distant future. I'm not speaking about months, but this regime is so widely despised, and it is blind to reality. Regardless of the genocidal nature of the regime, it is blind to the reality that the world is disgusted with it, that the world looks down upon Zionism, that Zionism has turned into a word, if not more ugly, but just as ugly as the word Nazi has been since I was a child. So the United States does not see what everyone else is seeing. The emperor has no clothes, but the emperor seems to think that he still is wearing a silk suit and he's honored across the world. And that's not just Trump. That's not just Trump. That is the whole political establishment of the United States. And I think that's the same is true in its own way in European capitals. And that is what is going to contribute to their downfall more than anything else.
Scott, just before wrapping up this session, here is a question for you. Do you think that the United States and Israel are planning a false flag event to give reason to attack Iran?
There's no false flag event that could justify an attack on Iran that exceeds what is happening in reality. I mean, why do you need a false flag when you have a nuclear program that the United States will exaggerate and turn into a nuclear weapons capability that we've already said gives us justification to attack? You don't need a false flag. You have an ongoing conflict with Yemen. If you want an excuse, you can do what Trump is doing, saying that if Yemen continues to resist, and they will resist, we're going to blame Iran because Iran is supported. That's not a false flag. That's just the U.S. straight up saying they're going. We don't need a false flag. We don't need a USS Maine. We don't need some sort of sneak attack. We've created, this is half the problem, is that we've boxed ourselves into these stupid corners where we shouldn't be. We should not link Yemen's continued resistance to a potential military conflict with Iran. That is stupid. We should not link a difficult negotiating process with Iran over its nuclear program to the need for military action. But we've made these linkages, and why do we need a false flag under these circumstances? Israel, what I'll say is this: Israel can't initiate an attack on Iran by itself that will succeed. Israel is carrying out what I believe they're not false flag, but I think Israel is carrying out a series of covert actions against Iran that are provocative in nature. And the goal is to get Iran to overreact and therefore use that as a justification to strike. I don't know what the facts are about what happened in Bandar Abbas, but according to news reports, these were precursors for solid rocket motor fuel that blew up, and that this could have been done, by agents working on behalf of Israel. There's other things happening in Iran. Israel has a history of blowing things up, of taking out, assassinating scientists, assassinating foreign leaders. And I think I am worried about this. I am worried about Israeli provocation. I think the United States has told Israel that it will not tolerate a unilateral military action by Israel, meaning planes flying in and bombing. That we won't do that. If that's going to happen, it has to be a joint operation, and we're not there yet. But what I do see happening is that Israel will carry out increasingly aggressive covert actions that will that are designed to stress Iran and to generate an Iranian reaction that could be used as justification for less than. I do think if we're going to strike Iran, and I hope we don't, that we have to do it in a way that doesn't target Iran's nuclear program. It has to be a more limited attack that would trigger a limited Iranian response. That kind of thing. There has to be a pressure valve. We need the pressure to relieve. If we attack Iran's nuclear infrastructure, we can't do that without nuclear weapons, and that's a non-starter. I just don't think the United States is ready to go down that path. I don't think Iran wants to destroy Israel because that invites existential responses from others. But I do think that there's an absolute need for, and I say this with horror in my heart, but Israel has to be taught a lesson. And I think Israel, if it overplays its hand, the covert action is still an act of war against Iran. And Iran's not stupid. They know what's going on. They know what Israel's up to. They know what Israel has done in the past. They know what Israel is planning today. And I do believe at some point in time, Israel will overplay its hand and will create a window of opportunity for a limited Iranian response that could serve to collapse the pressure, meaning that instead of promoting a greater war, cause everybody to take a step back. Because if you knock I don't want to use bad language for Professor Marandi, but if you knock the dog poop out of Israel, you hit them harder than they've ever been hit before in their entire life. I'm not talking about, having a missile hit in a field, open field, or hitting some open play. I'm talking about hammering Israel, a decisive strike against a critical place that takes it off the map. And now Israel goes, oops. And Iran goes, we can do that again and again and again all day long. And you can't stop us. Once Israel wakes up to that reality and America wakes up to that reality, suddenly peace becomes an option. And suddenly the path to peace is resolve Gaza. Unfortunately, I think we're getting to that point because the United States has boxed itself into this corner, this ridiculous corner where we're empowering Israel to act stupid. How much can Iran take? How many times are you going to allow a port facility to be blown up or an energy place to be blown up or something else to be blown up or somebody to be assassinated before you have to take response? And Iran has built a deterrence strategy or deterrence doctrine that says they will respond. And for Iran to have any credibility, they must respond. And the United States hasn't shown an ability to tell Israel no. I mean, if I were the American president, I would be telling Israel no, cease and desist. None of this is happening. But we're given a green light, which tells me that somebody in the United States wants this to happen. And if it does happen, again, I can't speak on behalf of Iran, and I'd be loath to, but I hope they knock the crap out of Israel. I'm not talking about nation destroying. I'm talking about the kind of punch that the guy wakes up in the morning with a broken jaw going, I shouldn't have gotten in the ring with Mike Tyson. Iran is Mike Tyson. They have a knockout punch. And the world doesn't believe it yet. Maybe it's time for Iran to unveil that knockout punch, not in a way that brings about end of the world, but Israel needs to be taught a lesson in humility. And that lesson is you don't have a defense against what Iran has to offer. That's just my personal opinion. I'll probably have the FBI knocking on my door in about a half an hour.
Very briefly, I just want to make a 2-3 points because I know the audience is tired of me.
No, not you.
One is no, really. I mean, you have whenever you speak, people are listening. But I think I'm somewhat boring. But 2 or 3 things I think are useful to keep in mind. I agree with what Scott says that basically the United States doesn't need often a false flag because they manufacturer logic. And the media, even though they hate Trump, they'll go with it. If they say Iran has done this, or Iran deserves this, then that's what they're going to do. But I do think that false flag operations come in handy, and it's possible that they will do that. Just like we recall that the Iranians were accused of trying to assassinate Trump. But we know that this was done by Americans, and that it had nothing to do with Iran. That's something that could happen in the future. I assure you that if Trump is assassinated, it will have been done by the deep state in the United States, and they will probably look to Iran first and foremost to blame. So that I do think there is a possibility of that. The second issue is that I agree with Scott. The Israeli regime does carry out sinister acts in Iran, and we've seen that before. Although the Iranian military doesn't use civilian ports, they have their own ports to bring in what they need. If it's for jet fuel, or it's rocket fuel, or solid fuel, or anything, they have their own ports. So that wasn't an issue there. But other fires that we've seen, the last two, like a factory for motorcycles, these are just ordinary fires. But that's what Scott says is true. The Israelis are going to push for war in whatever way is possible for them. That's what the Iranian foreign minister, as we've already discussed, has mentioned. Finally, and I'm not privy to anything secret in Iran, I always steer clear of these things. Iranian missiles and Iranian drones, and there are many hundreds of thousands of them, and there are hundreds of underground bases in Iran. They can destroy Israel. There's no doubt about that. They can destroy almost everything sensitive in the Persian Gulf and Israel. But if you want to fire a missile, let's say at an electrical power plant, you don't have to be that precise. You can fire 10 missiles and that power plant is down. But if you want to knock out a plane, or if you want to knock out something small, you need more precision. And I think True Promise 1 and 2 were good opportunities for Iran to see its capabilities, to test the different type of missiles, how they can get through, how accurate they are. And I think that right now the Iranians are busy producing a missile defense capability that, when it is used, it will do exactly what Scott says it will do.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott and Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thanks for having me, and good seeing you again, Professor Marandi.
Great seeing you too, Scott.
Yeah. Here is, we have 2 channels, and you can follow us on Dialogue Works Clips on YouTube and Acast. I'm going to put the audio files on Acast and the clips on Dialogue Works Clip. Please help us to grow these channels. Thank you.